At 10:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, I wasn't supposed to be at my parents' house. I found my name crossed out of a document I had spent my entire adult life protecting. Not erased, not revised, crossed out. Thick black ink, slow and deliberate, like someone wanted to feel the pen bite into paper. I stood alone in the den, with the Christmas light still blinking in the front window, holding a manila folder that smelled faintly of old coffee and lemon polish. The house was quiet in that uneasy way it gets after a family argument, when everyone has retreated to separate rooms, pretending nothing happened. Upstairs, my mother's television murmured. Down the hall, my father's study door was closed. My hands didn't shake. That surprised me. I had always assumed betrayal would feel loud, violent, something you'd hear coming. But this felt surgical, clean, intentional. My name is Caroline Foster. I'm 33 years old. And that night was the moment I understood that the love I grew up believing in had always been conditional. 15 minutes earlier, I'd been rinsing a wine glass in the kitchen, listening to my sister laugh too loudly at something my father said. The sound carried that familiar edge, the one that said she was performing, hosting, managing the mood. Claire had always been good at that. She knew when to laugh, when to sigh, when to lean her head on our mother's shoulder, just long enough to look affectionate, without committing to it. I had come by to drop off paperwork for the family company. That was my excuse. Northline Estates was technically my father's real estate firm, but for the past 8 years, I'd been the one handling compliance, contracts, zoning appeals, and everything that required reading more than one page at a time. I didn't have a title. I didn't ask for one. I told myself it didn't matter. Just leave it in the den, my mother Patricia had said, already distracted. We'll look at it tomorrow. Tomorrow never came for things I needed. I set the folder on my father's desk, but when I turned to leave, I noticed another file half hidden beneath a stack of Christmas cards. Blue cover, legal weight, the kind of folder you don't leave lying around unless you think no one will look. I shouldn't have opened it, I know that, but curiosity wasn't what moved my hand. Instinct did. The same instinct that had kept Northline afloat through 2 audits and a threatened lawsuit when a developer tried to quietly bury an easement violation. The same instinct that told me when silence in a room meant decisions had already been made. The document inside was titled, Amendment to Family Trust and Operating Agreement. I read it once, without understanding. Then again, slower. The trust that held my parents' primary residence, 2 rental properties, and controlling interest in Northline Estates had been amended 6 months earlier. The original beneficiaries were listed as equal shares between Claire Foster and Caroline Foster. Next to my name was a single, heavy line. Beneath it, handwritten initials. My father's. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I didn't feel faint. I felt managed. Behind me, the refrigerator clicked on. Somewhere upstairs, a laugh track swelled and faded. Life continued, indifferent to the fact that mine had just been quietly restructured without my consent. I closed the folder carefully, slid it back exactly where it had been, and returned to the kitchen. Claire was pouring herself another glass of wine. She looked up, smiled, and said, "You heading out already?" Her voice was light, pleasant. The way you speak to someone you believe you've already won against. "I forgot something," I said. "Oh," she replied, eyes flicking toward the hallway. "Dad's busy. I won't take long." My father, Richard Foster, was sitting at his desk when I knocked. He didn't look up right away. He never did. He liked to create pauses, to establish hierarchy through silence. "Yes?" he said finally. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. "I saw the trust amendment," I said. He exhaled through his nose, slow and irritated, as if I'd just mentioned a parking ticket. "That wasn't meant for you. It has my name on it." "It had your name on it," he corrected. Things change. I waited. Silence was something I'd learned from him. It made people uncomfortable. It made them fill the space. "We did what made sense," he said. "Claire's starting a family. You're independent. You always have been." Independent. The word landed exactly where it was meant to. A compliment, shaped like a dismissal. "I handle the contracts," I said. "I handle the zoning board, the litigation prep, the compliance filings." "Yes, and we appreciate that," he replied. But that's work. This is family. The distinction was surgical. I looked at him then. Really looked. The man who taught me how to balance a ledger before I was old enough to drive. The man who praised my work ethic while quietly letting me absorb responsibilities that freed him from risk. "When were you going to tell me?" I asked. He shrugged. "After the holidays. No need to upset anyone but me." I nodded once. Not because I agreed, but because something inside me had already gone quiet. A door closing, softly. "I see," I said. That was it. No argument, no plea. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask how they justified it. I didn't explain what it cost me to keep the company solvent, while Claire posted photos from weekend getaways and talked about work-life balance at brunch. I left. In my car, parked beneath the frostbitten maple in the driveway, I sat with the engine off and my hands folded in my lap. I thought about every Thanksgiving dinner where my contribution was described as helping out. Every birthday forgotten because you're so low maintenance. Every promotion I turned down because I believed I was investing in something that would eventually include me. I had mistaken access for belonging, proximity for power, love for leverage. By the time I pulled onto Maple Ridge Road, something inside me had hardened. Not into anger, into clarity. They thought removing my name from paper removed my value. They were wrong. And they were about to learn the difference between owning assets and relying on someone who knows how to protect them. If you've ever sat at a family table and realized too late that you were never a guest, only labor, you already know what comes next. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment I stopped waiting to be chosen. The first thing I did after leaving my parents' house wasn't dramatic. I didn't call a friend. I didn't scream into the steering wheel or cry in a parking lot. I drove home, fed my cat, and slept for exactly 3 hours. At 5:18 a.m., I woke up with the same calm certainty I used to feel before a difficult negotiation. Not adrenaline, not panic, just focus. Betrayal doesn't always arrive as a single explosion. Sometimes it settles into your bones overnight and wakes you up with a list. By 6 o'clock, I had coffee, my laptop open, and a yellow legal pad on the kitchen table. I wrote one sentence at the top and underlined it twice. What do they need me for? And what do I need them for? I'd spent most of my adult life assuming the answers were obvious. They needed my loyalty. I needed their approval. That equation had never been tested because I'd never stopped providing my side of it. Now, I was about to. Northline Estates wasn't a small operation. On paper, it looked clean and respectable. 3 commercial properties, 2 residential developments, a rotating list of subcontractors, and a long history with the county planning office. My father liked to say the company ran on relationships. That was true. What he never said out loud was whose relationships. I was the one who knew which zoning officer would quietly flag an issue before it became a violation. I was the one who understood which environmental consultant would move a report to the top of the pile if a deadline got tight. I was the one who had memorized the personalities of every mid-level bureaucrat who could slow a project by 6 months with a single email. Claire didn't know any of that. She knew branding. She knew presentation. She knew how to say we when she meant me. By 7:30, my phone buzzed. Claire. I watched it ring until it stopped. A minute later, a text. Did you leave upset last night? Dad said you misunderstood something. Can we talk later? Misunderstood. The word families use when they want to reverse engineer your reaction instead of their actions. I didn't respond. At 8:15, my mother texted. Good morning, sweetheart. We should all sit down and clear the air. You know how sensitive your father gets around the holidays. Translation: manage him. Smooth it over. Absorb the discomfort so the house stays quiet. I turned the phone face down. At 9 o'clock, I logged into the shared Northline server. My access still worked. No one had thought to revoke it. They never did things proactively. They assumed I'd always be there. I opened the compliance folder first, then contracts, then the trust-adjacent documents I'd scanned years ago, just in case. By noon, I had confirmed what I suspected. They hadn't just removed me from the trust. They had never formally removed me from operational liability. My name was still attached to filings, still listed as a compliance contact on 3 active permits, still referenced in internal documentation as the point person for regulatory communication. They had taken away the inheritance. They had kept the risk. That's when I smiled for the first time. At 1:30 p.m., I made my first call. Law office of Michael Brenner, the receptionist answered. I'd like to schedule a consultation, I said, regarding corporate exposure and trust amendments. There was a pause. Are you a current client of Northline Estates? No, I said calmly. I'm a former insider. That got me an appointment the next morning. The second call was harder, not because of fear, but because of habit. Zoning and Development, this is Ellen. Hi, Ellen. This is Caroline Foster. Oh, hi, Caroline, she said warmly. I was just thinking about you. Haven't heard from you since the Ridgeway filing. I wanted to give you a heads up, I said. I'm no longer representing Northline Estates. Silence. Just long enough to register. Oh, Ellen said carefully. Is everything all right? I can't speak to their internal decisions, I replied. But going forward, please direct all correspondence to Richard Foster or Claire Foster. Another pause. Longer this time. Understood, she said. Thank you for letting us know. That call alone shifted more power than any argument ever could. By the end of the afternoon, I had notified 3 offices, 2 consultants, and 1 insurance underwriter that I was no longer authorized to act on Northline's behalf. I didn't accuse, I didn't explain, I didn't vent. I simply withdrew consent. At 5:47 p.m., my father finally called. Caroline, he said, skipping pleasantries. What are you doing? I'm stepping back, I replied. You can't just step back, he snapped. You're listed on. Yes, I interrupted gently. And that's something your attorney should fix as soon as possible. You're being emotional. No, I said. I'm being precise. He inhaled sharply. Your sister and I had a long talk today. We're willing to revisit some things. Revisit. As if my place in the family were a line item that could be adjusted if negotiations got uncomfortable. That won't be necessary, I said. What does that mean? It means I'm no longer working for a company that doesn't acknowledge my stake, I answered. Financially or otherwise. You're punishing us. I'm protecting myself. There it was. The shift. The moment where the script stopped working. You're overreacting, he said. This is exactly why we made the decision we did. You get rigid. You don't see the bigger picture. The bigger picture, apparently, was one where my labor remained invisible and my compliance remained mandatory. I see it clearly, I said, for the first time. He hung up on me. That night, Claire posted a photo on social media. A cozy shot of my parents' living room, captioned, "Family is everything. Grateful for the love that surrounds us." I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I closed the app. At 10:03 p.m., an email came through from Northline's outside counsel. Subject: urgent. Compliance question. I didn't open it. Not yet. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window, looking out at the quiet street. Somewhere down the block, someone was decorating a tree. Life moved on, blissfully unaware of balance sheets and betrayals. I wasn't angry. Anger burns hot and fast. This was colder, slower, more sustainable. They thought removing my name from the trust would keep me compliant. What they didn't understand was that my silence had always been a choice. And choices can be revoked. By morning, they would realize just how much of their stability depended on a woman they had quietly excluded. And by then, it would already be too late. The email stayed unopened overnight, like a glass of milk left on the counter. I knew it would sour if I waited too long, but I also knew timing mattered. Power doesn't come from speed, it comes from sequence. At 7:12 a.m., I forwarded the email to Michael Brenner without comment. By 8:40, I was sitting in a leather chair across from him, watching his eyebrows climb slowly as he read. Michael Brenner was in his early 60s, compact, sharp-eyed, and spoke in short, efficient sentences. He had spent decades cleaning up messes created by people who thought family loyalty could substitute for legal structure. This, he said, tapping the page, is sloppy. That was my impression. They amended the trust, but didn't update operational roles, indemnity clauses, or insurance riders, he continued, which means they kept you exposed. Yes, and, he added, looking up, you were never compensated as an officer. No title, no equity. No written agreement. He leaned back. So they removed your upside and kept your downside. I nodded. That's not just unfair, he said. It's dangerous. For them. The word landed exactly where it should have. Michael slid a yellow pad toward himself and began writing. Here's what's going to happen next. They're going to panic. They'll try to get you to sign something retroactively, or guilt you into resuming duties while they sort it out. They already started, I said. Of course they did, he replied. People like this don't understand boundaries. They understand leverage. He looked at me over his glasses. Do you want back in? The question was simple. The answer wasn't. I want out, I said finally, cleanly. Michael smiled. Not warmly, professionally. Then we're going to do 3 things. First, we formally withdraw you from all operational roles. Second, we document the trust change and its implications. Third, he paused. We protect you in case they implode. That afternoon, his office sent a certified letter to Northline Estates. Clear language. No accusations. Just facts. I was no longer acting in any capacity for the company. Any filings, representations, or uses of my name beyond that date were unauthorized. Any attempt to imply my involvement would be met with formal action. It was the kind of letter that doesn't shout, it waits. At 4:26 p.m., Claire called again. This time, I answered. Hey, she said too quickly. Why is a lawyer sending letters to Dad? Because that's how formal boundaries work, I replied. She sighed. You didn't have to go nuclear. I didn't, I said. I went legal. There was a pause. I could hear traffic in the background. She was in her car, probably driving home from a Pilates class or a coffee meeting. Her life hadn't changed yet. She still thought this was a misunderstanding she could smooth over. You're making this bigger than it needs to be, she said. No, I replied. I'm seeing it at the size it always was. She lowered her voice. Dad's under a lot of stress. The lenders are asking questions. The zoning office called this morning. I let that sit. You told them you weren't representing the company anymore, didn't you? She pressed. Yes. Caroline, that's not fair. Fair. The word again. Families love fairness when it inconveniences the person who finally stops absorbing the imbalance. You removed me from the trust, I said. That was a structural decision. This is just a consequence. That's different, she snapped. Is it? She didn't answer. Claire, I continued, did you know they were doing it? Another pause. Longer. Too long. I knew they were adjusting things, she said carefully. You know how Dad gets about legacy. There it was. The quiet admission. And you were okay with it, I said. It's not like you needed it, she replied. You've always been fine on your own. Independent again. The compliment that excused the cut. I needed honesty, I said. Not protection. Not interpretation. Honesty. She exhaled sharply. What do you want from us? The question was almost sincere. I want nothing, I said. That's the point. She hung up. By Friday, the ripple effects became visible. A developer pulled a meeting, citing uncertainty in compliance leadership. An underwriter requested updated signatures on an insurance rider. A contractor asked who would be handling permitting delays. My father left 3 voicemails, all variations of the same theme. We're a family. This is internal. You're embarrassing us. I didn't respond. On Sunday, my mother came by unannounced. I saw her car from the window and felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Not fear. Conditioning. I opened the door. She looked smaller than usual, wrapped in a cardigan, hair done but rushed. She stepped inside and glanced around my apartment, as if searching for signs of instability. Sweetheart, she said, touching my arm. This has gotten out of hand. No, I said. It's finally in hand. She frowned. You don't understand how these things work. I do, I replied. That's why this is happening. She sat down heavily on the couch. Your father feels attacked. I wasn't attacking him. You took away his support. I nodded. Yes. She looked at me then. Really looked. You're punishing us. I'm opting out. She shook her head. Families don't opt out. They do, I said. They just don't talk about it. Silence stretched between us. You know Claire's pregnant, she said suddenly. The word landed with intention. I didn't, I replied. Well, she said softly, things are changing. They already did, I said. She stood, smoothing her sweater. I hope you don't regret this. I met her gaze. I already regretted staying. That night, I received a calendar notification I hadn't scheduled. Northline Estates, emergency board meeting. They'd forgotten to remove me from the invite list. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, I declined, with a note. Please update your records. I am no longer affiliated with this entity in any capacity. I closed my laptop and leaned back, breathing evenly. The panic was on their side now. They had removed my name from inheritance papers, assuming I'd stay out of obligation. They were about to learn what happens when the person who holds the threads quietly sets them down. And in the silence that followed, the structure they took for granted began to wobble. Chapter 4 would be the moment they tried to pull me back in. It wouldn't go the way they expected. They waited 3 days before making their next move. Not because they were calm, but because they were scrambling. I knew that pattern well. My father liked to believe silence created authority. In reality, it usually meant he was consulting someone who told him what he didn't want to hear. The call came on Wednesday at 2:11 p.m. It wasn't from my parents. It was from an unfamiliar number with a downtown area code. Caroline Foster? A man asked. Yes, this is Daniel Reeve. I'm counsel for Northline Estates. I almost smiled. Of course they'd hired someone new. Someone who didn't know the history. Someone who would try a cleaner angle. I'm listening, I said. We're hoping to resolve a few misunderstandings before they escalate, he began. His voice was smooth, neutral. The kind lawyers use when they want to sound reasonable, while quietly applying pressure. There's no misunderstanding, I replied. Only delayed acceptance. A pause. Papers shifting. Our client feels blindsided by your sudden withdrawal, he said. Your role was informal, yes, but integral. You walking away without transition has caused disruption. I didn't walk away without notice, I said. I gave formal notice. In writing. Yes, he conceded. But we believe there's room to negotiate a temporary arrangement, a consulting agreement, short-term, clean. There it was. They didn't want me back as family. They wanted me back as a buffer. I'm not interested, I said. He cleared his throat. Ms. Foster, with respect, your name is still associated with multiple filings. A clean separation benefits everyone. That's why my attorney sent a letter, I replied, to facilitate exactly that. Another pause. Longer now. May I ask, he said carefully, what prompted this timing? I thought of the black line through my name. The quiet assumption that I would accept it. Transparency, I said. Or the lack of it. I see, he said, though it was clear he didn't. If you reconsider, please know our door is open. I'm sure it is, I replied. Goodbye. I ended the call and sat there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. They had moved from guilt to diplomacy. That meant the pressure was working. 2 hours later, Claire showed up at my apartment. She didn't knock. She rang the bell twice, sharp and impatient, like she was late for something and I was in her way. When I opened the door, she looked past me into the apartment, scanning, assessing. You couldn't answer your phone? She said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I could, I replied. I chose not to. She turned, exasperated. You're being impossible. No, I said. I'm being consistent. She crossed her arms. Her coat was expensive, neutral tones, the kind of outfit designed to signal stability. You're hurting the company, she said. The company removed me, I answered. I'm just honoring that. That's not how it works, she snapped. You don't get to pick and choose which parts of family you keep. I looked at her for a long moment. At the familiar face, the practiced confidence, the way she always spoke as if the rules bent naturally in her direction. I didn't pick this, I said. You did. Her jaw tightened. You're acting like a victim. I'm acting like an adult, I replied. There's a difference. She paced the room, heels clicking against the floor. Dad's furious. The lenders are nervous. One of the partners is asking whether you're planning to make a claim. I'm not, I said. Then say that, she demanded. Put it in writing. Help us stabilize things. I shook my head. Stability isn't my responsibility anymore. She stopped pacing and faced me. You always do this. Do what? Pull away, she said. You shut down and disappear instead of fighting. I let out a small breath. I fought for years. Quietly. You just didn't notice because it benefited you. Her eyes flashed. That's not fair. No, I said. It's accurate. She looked away, then back at me, recalibrating. When she spoke again, her tone softened. "Caroline," she said, "I'm pregnant. Things are changing. Dad wants to make sure the business survives. He's thinking about legacy." Legacy. Always that word. Never accountability. "I hope the business survives," I said. "I truly do." "That's it?" she asked. "You're just going to walk away?" "Yes." She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "You don't get it," she said finally. "Without you, things could fall apart." I met her gaze. "That's not my fault." Her voice dropped. "If things go wrong, this will follow you. People will talk." "They already are," I said. "I'm comfortable with the truth." She grabbed her bag, anger rising again. "You think you're so principled." "I think I'm done," I replied. She opened the door, then turned back one last time. "You're choosing this." "No," I said. "I'm accepting it." She left without another word. That night, I received an email from the county clerk. Subject: Inquiry regarding compliance contact, change, Northline Estates. I forwarded it to Michael Brenner. 5 minutes later, he called. "They're circling," he said, "and they're exposed." Define exposed. "The trust amendment created an imbalance," he explained. "They removed your benefit, but left your implied authority in place. That creates a narrative problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that looks bad in court," he said. I closed my eyes briefly. Not from fear, from clarity. "What's the next step?" I asked. "That depends," he replied. "Do you want distance, or do you want leverage?" I thought about my mother's quiet warnings, my father's anger, Claire's certainty that things would bend back into place if she pushed hard enough. "I want my name clean," I said, "and my future separate." Michael paused. "Then we formalize everything. Publicly, if needed." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Do it," I said. By Friday, the letter went out, not just to Northline, to the county, to the insurer, to the primary lender. A formal declaration of disassociation. No accusations, no dramatics, just facts. I wasn't part of their operations. I wasn't responsible for their decisions. And I hadn't been consulted about changes that directly affected my legal standing. The response was immediate, too immediate. At 9:06 p.m., my father called again. This time, I answered. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I protected myself," I said. "You made us look unstable." "You made yourselves unstable," I replied. There was a sharp sound on the other end, a fist hitting a desk, a door slamming. "You think you're free?" he said. "You think this won't come back on you?" "I know it will," I answered calmly. "That's why I'm documenting everything." Silence. Then, quieter, more dangerous. "You're burning bridges." "No," I said. "I'm refusing to stand on one that was never meant to hold me." He hung up. I sat there in the dark, phone still in my hand. This was the moment where families usually escalate, where they threaten, where they rewrite history out loud. I wasn't afraid, because the more they pushed, the clearer it became. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted control, and they were starting to realize they'd lost it. Not because I exposed it, but because without me holding it together, the truth had nowhere left to hide. The first crack showed up on a Thursday morning, disguised as a routine question. I was at my desk reviewing a contract for a nonprofit I'd recently agreed to consult for, when my phone buzzed with a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in months. "Caroline Foster?" the voice said cautiously. "Yes." "This is Mark Ellison. We worked together on the Willow Creek development 2 years ago." I remembered him immediately. Senior loan officer, careful, methodical, the kind of man who never raised his voice and never missed a detail. "How can I help, Mark?" There was a brief pause, the sound of a door closing. "Privacy." "I'm calling informally," he said, "off the record." "Those words are never casual." "Go on," I said. "We received a notice that you're no longer affiliated with Northline Estates," he continued. "But your name still appears on several internal risk assessments we relied on when extending credit." I closed my eyes. "What kind of risk assessments?" I asked. "Compliance projections, regulatory buffers, contingency planning," he said. "The conservative assumptions, the ones that made the numbers work." Of course they had. "I didn't prepare those as an officer," I said, "and I wasn't informed of any trust or governance changes." "That's what concerns us," he replied, "because without your involvement, the exposure profile changes significantly." There it was. Not drama, not emotion. Math. I can't comment on Northline's current operations, I said carefully. But you should direct any formal questions to their legal counsel. He hesitated. If you were still involved, would you be comfortable standing behind the numbers as they exist today? The question was framed neutrally, but the implication was sharp. No, I said. I wouldn't. He exhaled slowly. That's what I needed to know. When the call ended, I sat back and let the quiet return. They hadn't hidden anything illegal. Not yet. But they had hidden something just as dangerous. They'd been propping up confidence with my caution. By noon, Michael Brenner had 3 new emails waiting. One from a lender, one from an insurer, one from a municipal review board, all asking variations of the same question. Who is actually in charge now? At 2 p.m., Michael called. They're asking for updated certifications, he said. Updated compliance attestations. And guess what? What? They want them signed by someone with your background. I laughed once. Short, sharp. They removed my benefit, but kept my credibility, I said. Exactly, he replied. And credibility doesn't transfer automatically. That afternoon, Claire tried again. This time, she texted, "Can you please stop telling people you're not involved? You're creating confusion." I stared at the screen. Confusion was what happened when lies lost their interpreter. I didn't reply. At 4:37 p.m., my mother emailed. Subject: This is getting out of hand. The message was long, emotional, carefully worded. She wrote about family reputation, about how hard my father had worked, about how stress affected his health, about how Claire was overwhelmed. She didn't mention the trust. She didn't mention the black line through my name. She didn't mention the decision. She ended with, "We just want things to go back to how they were." I read it once. Then I archived it. At 6:15, Michael forwarded me something new. An internal memo from Northline's insurer. Policy review pending. Material change in risk management structure. Michael added one line beneath it. This is where it starts to hurt. The following morning, my father showed up at my door. He hadn't called. He hadn't texted. He stood there in a heavy coat, shoulders stiff, jaw set. I didn't invite him in. "What's going on?" he demanded. "Good morning," I replied. "This isn't a game," he said. "The insurer's asking questions. The bank's asking questions. Everyone wants answers. You should give them honest ones," I said. He stepped closer. "You know exactly what they're asking." "Yes," I said. "They're asking who's actually managing the risk." "You did that," he snapped. "You made yourself indispensable, and now you're punishing us for it." I met his eyes. "I didn't make myself indispensable. You chose not to replace me." "That's not fair. It's factual." He ran a hand through his hair. "Claire can step in." "Can she?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. "You've always been good at the details," he said finally. "But leadership is bigger than that." I almost smiled. Leadership, apparently, was inheritable. Competence was optional. "They're threatening to revise the loan terms," he said, "if they decide the risk profile changed materially." "That's what happens when it does," I replied. "You could fix this," he said. "Just temporarily. Just help us stabilize." There it was again. The ask disguised as reason. "And then what?" I asked. "We'll talk," he said. "Revisit things." "You already revisited them," I said. "Without me." He clenched his jaw. "You're being stubborn." "I'm being consistent," I said. His voice dropped. "If the company takes a hit, that affects your mother, your sister, your future niece or nephew." I felt it then. The familiar tug. And just as familiar, the clarity that followed. "You should have thought of that before you crossed my name out," I said. He stared at me. For the first time, I saw uncertainty behind his anger. "You really won't help," he said. "I already did," I replied. "For years. For free." He left without another word. By the end of the week, the rumor mill caught up. A contractor mentioned delays. A consultant quietly declined a renewal. A county reviewer asked for additional documentation that had never been required before. Nothing catastrophic, just friction. The kind friction causes when something essential is missing. On Sunday night, Claire posted again. A photo of her and our parents at dinner. Forced smiles, tight framing. Caption: "Family sticks together when things get tough." I looked at it, then turned off my phone. Because the truth was simple. They didn't want me back because they missed me. They wanted me back because the system I'd built was collapsing without its silent operator. And the more they scrambled to patch it, the clearer it became to everyone watching. I hadn't caused the instability. I had been absorbing it. And now that I wasn't, the cost of their decisions was finally visible. Not guilt, not negotiation, blame. And that was when things would stop being quiet. The shift from pleading to blame was subtle at first. It always is. People don't announce it when they decide you're the problem. They just start speaking as if it's already been agreed upon. I noticed it on Monday morning when a former colleague forwarded me an email I wasn't supposed to see. It was from Claire, sent to a small group of contractors and consultants who'd worked with Northline for years. Caroline has decided to step away unexpectedly during a sensitive transition. We're doing our best to stabilize operations despite the disruption. Unexpectedly. Disruption. I read it twice, then closed the message without responding. By noon, the tone had spread. A consultant I barely knew sent a polite note asking if I was still available in case questions came up, followed by an awkward line about hoping everything was okay personally. Another message, this one indirect, referenced internal family disagreements affecting timelines. They weren't accusing me outright. They were reframing the story. By mid-afternoon, Michael Brenner called. They're laying groundwork, he said. Soft blame. Narrative management. Is it working? I asked. With people who don't know you? Maybe, he replied. With institutions? No. I looked out my window at the bare branches lining the street. What's next? They'll try to formalize it, he said. Create a record that suggests you abandoned responsibilities. I exhaled slowly. Can they? They can try, he said. But it won't hold if we respond correctly. That evening, my father sent a group email. To me, to Claire, to their attorney. Subject, clarifying roles. It was carefully written. Too carefully. He outlined how I'd voluntarily reduced involvement over the past year, how the company had adapted, how recent confusion stemmed from personal choices rather than structural decisions. He ended with, "We appreciate Caroline's past contributions and wish her well in her future endeavors." It read like a termination notice written by someone who didn't have the authority to issue one. Michael read it and laughed once. "They're trying to close the door behind you," he said, "after pushing you out the window." "What do we do?" I asked. "We don't argue," he replied. "We document." The next morning, he sent a response. Not emotional, not defensive. It laid out dates, facts, attachments, the trust amendment, the absence of notice, the continued use of my name after removal, the lack of compensation or formal authority, the timeline of my withdrawal. It ended with a single sentence. Any suggestion that Ms. Foster abandoned duties is inaccurate and unsupported by the record. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 2 days later, a local business journal published a short piece online. Northline Estates navigates leadership transition amid family restructuring. It was vague, non-committal, but the implication was clear. Leadership transition, family restructuring. I wasn't named, but I was unmistakable. Claire had spoken to someone. I read the article once, then again. Then I forwarded it to Michael. "They went public," I said. "Yes," he replied. Which means they're nervous. That night, my mother called. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was softer than usual. Tired. "I don't recognize you anymore," she said. "This isn't who you are." I deleted it. The next call came from someone unexpected. "Caroline?" a woman said. "Yes, this is Judge Elaine Morton." I sat up straighter. She was retired now, but she'd overseen a zoning appeal years earlier. One of the first major cases I'd handled, quietly in the background, while my father took credit publicly. "Yes, Judge Morton," I said. "I'm calling as a private citizen," she said. "I saw your name mentioned in connection with Northline. I wanted to check something." "Of course. Are you still affiliated with them?" "No," I replied. "I'm not." She hummed thoughtfully. "That's what I thought." I waited. "They're asking for extensions," she said, citing internal instability. I said nothing. "I won't comment on that," she continued. "But I wanted you to know something." "Yes?" "Your reputation is intact," she said. "People who've worked with you know the difference between departure and derailment." My throat tightened slightly. I hadn't expected that. "Thank you," I said. She paused. "Be careful. When families lose control, they look for scapegoats. The next morning, the blame became explicit. Claire sent me an email. CC'd widely. We are experiencing increased scrutiny due to Caroline's abrupt withdrawal and refusal to cooperate during a critical period. There it was. Refusal to cooperate, as if cooperation were still an obligation. Michael responded within the hour. Miss Foster has no obligation to cooperate with an entity she does not control, was not consulted by, and was formally excluded from ownership. The reply went out to everyone. Silence followed. Then, late that night, my father called again. I answered. They're asking if we misrepresented our governance, he said quietly. Did you? I asked. He didn't answer. They're asking if you were ever formally authorized to make the representations we relied on, he continued. Was I asked. His breath hitched. You know you were. I know I did the work, I said. Authorization is different. You're going to let them tear this apart, he said. No, I replied. I'm letting them look. You're vindictive, he said, desperation creeping in. I'm transparent, I said. He was silent for a long moment. You always did like rules, he said bitterly. I like accountability, I replied. He hung up. I sat there long after the call ended, phone resting in my hand. This was the moment things usually turned ugly, when accusations hardened, when people chose narratives over repair. But something unexpected happened instead. The next day, the Business Journal published a follow-up. Correction. Northline Estates clarifies governance following misstatements. It was short, clinical. It clarified that I had not been involved in recent decisions and was not responsible for operational disruptions. Someone had pushed back, not me. The tide had shifted. Blame only works when the audience is unsure. Once the facts are clear, it collapses under its own weight. By the end of the week, the calls stopped. The emails slowed. And in the quiet that followed, I understood something important. They hadn't turned on me because I left. They turned on me because I refused to be silent while they rewrote reality. And now that the attempt had failed, they were running out of moves. Not through words, through paperwork. And that was where they would finally lose what they thought they owned. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday, thick and overfed, like it had something to prove. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen counter and made coffee, the way I always did when I needed my hands steady and my head clear. Paper has a way of trying to rush you. I wasn't going to let it. When I finally slid it open, I already knew what it would be. A proposed settlement. Northline Estates letterhead. New counsel. Heavy language. It framed everything as mutual misunderstanding. A desire to resolve outstanding matters. A clean separation that would protect all parties. Attached was a document titled Mutual Release and Non-Disparagement Agreement. I read it once, then again. Slower. They wanted me to sign away any future claims, acknowledge that I had withdrawn voluntarily, agree not to discuss internal governance, agree not to interfere with operations. In exchange, they offered a one-time payment. It wasn't generous. It wasn't insulting either. It was calculated. Just enough to make it look reasonable. Just enough to tempt someone tired of conflict. I forwarded it to Michael Brenner. His response came back in 3 minutes. Do not sign. This is for them, not you. He called 10 minutes later. They're trying to cap their exposure, he said, and gag you. They think this ends it, I replied. They think paperwork creates reality, he said. It doesn't. It documents it. What happens if I refuse? They escalate, he said, or they concede. Which do you think this is? He paused. Escalation dressed as closure. That afternoon, Claire texted, You should consider this. It's fair. We're trying to move on. From a decision they'd made, without me. From consequences they hadn't anticipated. I didn't respond. Michael drafted a counter. Short. Direct. I would consider a release only if it reflected the actual sequence of events. No admission of voluntary withdrawal. No non-disparagement clause. Clear acknowledgement that I was removed from ownership without consultation. Full indemnification for any past representations made in good faith. He sent it. The reply came the next day. They rejected it outright. Instead, They sent something else. An amended operating agreement. My name was gone completely now. So was something else. Several safeguards I'd written years earlier. Risk buffers. Approval thresholds. Oversight language that required multiple signatures for major decisions. They'd stripped it down. Centralized authority. In my father's name. Michael stared at it in silence. They're consolidating, he said finally. That's bold. Or desperate, I said. Both, he replied. And dangerous. That same afternoon, the lender froze a credit line pending review. The insurer issued a conditional notice. The county requested updated governance documents for 3 active permits. Everything converged. They'd tried to force resolution through paperwork. Instead, they'd exposed exactly how fragile the structure was without shared oversight. My father called that night. His voice was controlled. Too controlled. We need to end this, he said. I agree, I replied. Then sign, he said. Let's put it behind us. Not like this, I said. What do you want? He snapped. I took a breath. I want acknowledgement, I said. In writing. That I was removed without notice. That I didn't abandon anything. That I'm not responsible for what happens next. That would make us look bad, he said. The truth often does, I replied. Silence. You're choosing to burn this down, he said. No, I said. I'm choosing not to be buried in it. He exhaled sharply. If you don't sign, we'll proceed without you. You already did, I said. He hung up. The next morning, Michael called with something new in his voice. They made a mistake, he said. What kind? They filed the amended operating agreement with the county, he said. And in doing so, they certified that no material governance changes had occurred in the past 12 months. My stomach dropped. Not from fear, but from recognition. That's not true, I said. No, he agreed. And they attached the trust amendment as an exhibit. I closed my eyes. They had tried to erase me so completely that they forgot the timeline mattered. That's misrepresentation, I said. Yes, Michael replied. And it's documented. What happens now? Now, he said carefully, they don't get to control the resolution. By the end of the week, the county issued a notice of inquiry, not an accusation. A question. Please clarify discrepancies in governance filings dated within the past year. The lender followed with a similar request. The insurer, too. 3 institutions. Same issue. Timeline. Sequence. Truth. I didn't initiate any of it. I didn't have to. Paperwork has a way of speaking for itself. On Friday evening, Claire sent one last message. This didn't have to go this far. I typed, then erased, then finally sent a single line. It went exactly as far as it needed to. I turned off my phone and poured a glass of water. Hands steady. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. They had tried to force a clean ending, with a document designed to protect them. Instead, they'd created a record that showed exactly what they'd done and when. Not to punish, to correct. And correction, I was learning, can be far more devastating than blame. Correction never arrives with sirens. It arrives with letters. 3 of them, in fact, all within the same 48 hours. Different letterheads, different tones, identical intent. The first was from the county planning office. Subject: request for clarification, governance discrepancies. It cited the amended operating agreement, the attached trust amendment, and the certification language. It asked for a timeline, names, dates, signatures. It asked who had authority when decisions were made. The second came from the lender. Subject: material change review. It referenced reliance on prior risk controls and named me explicitly as the individual whose oversight had informed initial underwriting. It requested confirmation that those controls were still in place. The third was from the insurer. Subject: reservation of rights. That one was colder. Legal. It outlined scenarios in which coverage could be limited if material misrepresentations were found. Michael Brenner read them all, without comment. Then he looked up at me. This is where companies usually start telling the truth, he said. By Tuesday, Northline's new counsel requested a meeting. Not a call. A meeting. Michael declined on my behalf. They didn't need me there. They needed answers. And the answers didn't require my presence. Still, my father called. His voice was different now. Not angry, not sharp. Thin. They're asking for documents, he said. Old ones, versions, emails. That makes sense, I replied. They want to know when decisions were made, he continued. And by whom? Yes, I said. He swallowed. I could hear it. They want to know why your name appears on risk frameworks after you were removed from ownership. I said nothing. Caroline, he said quietly, did you plan this? No, I replied honestly. I planned to leave. He laughed once, a hollow sound. You always were good at details. Details. The things he'd dismissed until they became leverage. I need to ask you something, he said. I waited. If they ask whether you were informed of the trust amendment before it was executed, he said, what will you say? I closed my eyes. The truth, I replied. He exhaled slowly. Which is? That I wasn't, I said, and that I found out by accident. Silence. That's not how we remember it, he said weakly. I know, I replied. Memory is flexible. Documents aren't. He hung up without saying goodbye. By Thursday, the correction process was visible. Northline submitted supplemental filings, revised statements, clarifications. Each one added friction. Each one triggered another question. The lender froze expansion funding. The insurer issued a conditional endorsement, narrowing coverage. The county delayed permit approvals, pending resolution. Nothing dramatic. Just enough pressure to make every decision harder. Claire finally called. Not angry, not polished, tired. I didn't think it would go like this, she said. I know, I replied. They're treating us like we lied, she said. Like we hid something. You did, I said gently. She sniffed. We were protecting the family. No, I said. You were protecting control. There was a long pause. I'm pregnant, she said again, as if the word might change the facts. I know, I replied. That doesn't make this your child's fault. She didn't laugh. What do you want? She asked quietly. I want my name clean, I said, and my future separate. She sighed. They're talking about unwinding the amendment. I raised an eyebrow, though she couldn't see it. Are they? Temporarily, she said. Or restructuring. Something that shows continuity. Continuity. Another word that meant keeping the surface intact while rearranging the truth underneath. That's between you and your counsel, I said. You won't help? She asked. I am helping, I replied. By not lying. That weekend, the Business Journal published another update. Northline Estates responds to governance review. This one was longer, more careful. It acknowledged internal changes, promised cooperation, emphasized transparency. My name appeared once. Former compliance advisor. That was new. And accurate. Michael smiled when he saw it. They're adjusting, he said, because they have to. On Monday morning, the county issued a formal notice. Not a penalty, a requirement. Independent governance review prior to approval of pending applications. Third-party oversight. The thing my father had resisted for years. The thing I'd quietly functioned as. I read the notice twice. Then I leaned back and exhaled. This was the correction. Not a courtroom. Not a confrontation. A system recognizing where it had been misled and recalibrating. That afternoon, my father sent a final email. Subject, moving forward. It was brief. He wrote that the family would be restructuring both the trust and the company, that advisors had been engaged, that he hoped time would heal misunderstandings. He didn't apologize. He didn't admit fault. But he also didn't ask me for anything. I replied with one line. I wish you clarity. I meant it, because clarity had already changed my life. They had tried to correct their mistake quietly, by erasing me. Instead, the correction came publicly, methodically, and without emotion. And in the process, something fundamental shifted. They no longer controlled the narrative. They were subject to it. I needed distance. And distance, once chosen, is the most powerful inheritance of all. Distance doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with slammed doors or final speeches. It comes quietly, in the absence of expectation. I realized it on a Tuesday morning, standing in my kitchen, holding a mug of coffee I'd reheated twice because I'd forgotten about it. The sun was coming through the window at an angle I hadn't noticed before. The house was silent. Not tense, not waiting, just quiet. For the first time in years, no part of my day revolved around anticipating someone else's reaction. No calls I had to brace for, no meetings I needed to prepare arguments for, No emotional weather reports to study before opening my mouth. I wasn't relieved. I was neutral. That scared me more than anger ever had. Michael noticed it too. "You're detaching," he said one afternoon when we met to finalize a few remaining documents. "I already detached," I replied. "This is something else." He nodded slowly. This is when people realize they're not actually obligated to stay angry. That night, I went through my phone and noticed something unsettling. I hadn't checked my family group chat in weeks. Not out of discipline, not out of resolve. I'd simply forgotten it existed. When I opened it, there were dozens of messages. Logistics, complaints, passive-aggressive updates disguised as information. Claire had sent a picture of a sonogram. My mother had replied with heart emojis. My father had posted a link to an article about leadership transitions. No one had tagged me. No one had asked my opinion. A year ago, that would have felt like erasure. Now, it felt like proof. They were rebuilding their world without my labor, my steadiness, my silent corrections. And it was wobbling. The independent governance review began the following week. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't accusatory. It was thorough. Outside consultants interviewed staff, reviewed email trails, compared versions of policies, mapped authority flow. They asked a simple question over and over again. Who made this decision? And too often, the answer was unclear. Sometimes my father claimed it. Sometimes Claire did. Sometimes no one wanted to. But the documents pointed to patterns. Controls that appeared only when my name was attached. Checks that disappeared after I left. Processes that had relied on habit rather than authority. I wasn't interviewed. I wasn't asked to explain. My absence was evidence enough. 2 weeks later, the consultant's preliminary findings leaked. Not the full report, just a summary paragraph buried halfway through an industry newsletter. Prior operational stability appeared to rely disproportionately on informal, undocumented oversight provided by a non-equity individual no longer affiliated with the organization. Non-equity individual, that was me. Unnamed, unpaid, unprotected, but suddenly undeniable. My phone rang that evening. It was my mother. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. "They're saying you were central," she said carefully. I said nothing. "They're saying we didn't formalize anything," she continued. "That we assumed—" She stopped. "You assumed I'd always be there," I said. "Yes," she whispered. I didn't feel satisfaction, just clarity. "You raised me to be responsible," I continued. "You just didn't expect me to apply that responsibility to myself." She cried then, softly, not theatrically. "I don't know how to fix this," she said. "You don't," I replied. "You adapt." She didn't like that answer, but she didn't argue. A few days later, I received an official letter from the insurer. They were closing the reservation of rights inquiry. No adverse action. No limitations. The letter cited clarified roles and corrected attribution. In plain language, they could no longer tie risk to me. My name was clean. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no replay loops, just rest. The final shift came unexpectedly. I ran into Claire at a grocery store on a Sunday afternoon. She looked different. Not styled, not prepared, just a woman buying cereal and frozen vegetables. She froze when she saw me. "Caroline," she said. "Claire," I replied. We stood there awkwardly, two sisters reduced to strangers by fluorescent lighting and a shopping cart. "They're restructuring the trust," she said finally. Again, I nodded. "That's what happens when foundations are weak," she swallowed. "They're talking about fairness now." I almost smiled. "Fairness usually enters the conversation after leverage leaves," I said. She looked at me carefully. "You really don't want anything, do you?" I considered the question. "I want my life," I said. "I already took it." She nodded slowly. "I don't think I ever knew how much you held together," she admitted. "That wasn't your job to know," I replied. "It was my job to stop doing it." She looked down at her cart. "I'm scared," she said. "I know," I replied. "That's what happens when someone stops absorbing impact for you." We parted without a hug, without promises, without closure. And that was okay, because closure isn't something you're given. It's something you stop seeking. A month later, Northline withdrew 2 expansion applications voluntarily. The board composition changed. Independent directors were added. My father stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on legacy planning. That phrase made me laugh the first time I read it. Legacy planning. As if legacy were a thing you could plan. After neglecting the people who built it, I started consulting again, selectively, with contracts that defined scope, authority, and compensation. No family businesses. No blurred lines. I set boundaries so clearly they felt like walls. And for the first time, those walls felt like freedom, not isolation. One evening, as I was shutting down my laptop, I caught my reflection in the dark screen. I looked older, not worn, defined. I thought about all the years I'd mistaken endurance for virtue, silence for loyalty, availability for love. I thought about how easily family becomes a justification for control, and how quietly control disguises itself as concern. The correction didn't ruin them. It simply removed the illusion that they were entitled to me. And once that illusion collapsed, everything else followed. Not with anger, not with threats, but with an apology that arrived too late to matter. The apology arrived on a Wednesday, not by phone, not in person, by certified mail. That alone told me everything I needed to know. People who are truly sorry don't need proof of delivery. I didn't open it right away. I set the envelope on the counter and made tea. Chamomile. The kind that's supposed to calm your nervous system. I watched the steam curl upward and disappear. Thought about how many times I'd been asked to stay calm, while other people made reckless choices. When I finally opened the letter, I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. Still careful, still controlled, still trying to sound reasonable. Caroline, I've spent a lot of time reflecting on everything that's happened these past months. I realize now that mistakes were made, assumptions were made, feelings were hurt. Mistakes were made. The passive voice has always been his favorite refuge. He went on to say he regretted how things unfolded, that the family had been under pressure, that he never intended to make me feel excluded, that the decisions regarding the trust were procedural, not personal. Procedural. As if erasing someone's stake in their own life were a clerical error. Then came the offer. He proposed a mediated conversation, a reset. He said the family wanted to move forward together, that there was room to redefine roles, that he believed I still had a place, if I wanted it. A place, not autonomy, not acknowledgement. A place. At the bottom of the letter was a postscript, written smaller. Your mother misses you. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't feel anger. I felt tired. Later that afternoon, I forwarded a copy to Michael. His reply was immediate. Do not respond emotionally. Decide structurally. That sentence stopped me cold. Decide structurally. That was the difference between the woman I used to be and the one I was becoming. I didn't owe them a conversation. I owed myself consistency. So I drafted a response. Short, clear, final. I acknowledge receipt of your letter. At this time, I'm not interested in mediation or role redefinition. I wish your family well as you continue restructuring. Please direct any further communication through counsel. I read it 3 times. No blame, no justification, no invitation. I sent it. The silence afterward was immediate and absolute. No calls, no follow-ups, no emotional aftershocks, just space. And in that space, something unexpected happened. My body relaxed. Not in a dramatic way, not all at once, but in small, measurable shifts. I stopped clenching my jaw at night. My shoulders lowered. I started sleeping through alarms instead of jolting awake before them. That weekend, I drove north on a whim. No destination, just motion. I stopped at a small lake outside of town and sat on a bench watching the water ripple in the wind. A woman nearby was teaching her daughter how to skip stones. They laughed when the stones sank immediately. No pressure, no performance, no legacy to manage. It struck me then how often I'd been told I was strong enough to handle it, strong enough to wait, strong enough to sacrifice. Strength had been used as a leash. The apology letter wasn't meant to heal. It was meant to reattach. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The final attempt came 2 weeks later, Thanksgiving. An invitation arrived from my mother. Just one line. It won't be the same without you. I stared at the message for a long time, not because I was tempted, because I finally understood what it meant. It wasn't about love. It was about comfort, about returning the room to its previous temperature. I typed a reply, "I won't be there this year. Take care." And that was it. No explanation. No counteroffer. No apology for having a boundary. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with friends, ate too much, laughed, talked about books and work, and nothing important. No one asked me to manage emotions. No one looked to me to smooth tension. I wasn't needed, and that was the greatest gift. Because when you stop being needed for the wrong reasons, you finally get to be wanted for the right ones. Not for me. For them. And when they did, I didn't have to lift a finger. Consequences don't arrive with drama. They arrive with schedules, with notices, with calendar invites that stop coming. I learned what had happened the same way I'd learned most things lately. Indirectly, quietly, without being asked to participate. It started with a headline I almost scrolled past. Northline Estates withdraws from Riverbend expansion. It wasn't framed as a failure. It never is. The article cited strategic reassessment, market headwinds, and a renewed focus on core assets. The language was careful, polished, and technically accurate in the way that only half-truths are. But I knew what it meant. The expansion was dead. The next week, a former colleague texted me, "Did you hear? The independent directors didn't approve the new financing." I replied with a single word, "No, that wasn't true. I had heard. I just hadn't been involved." Apparently, the lenders wanted revised projections. The insurers wanted tighter controls. The county wanted updated governance documentation. And the family wanted things to go back to the way they were. Those three desires couldn't coexist. Without me, Northline had discovered something inconvenient. Oversight couldn't be improvised. You either build it into the structure or you pay for it later. They paid. My father resigned from the board in early December. Not loudly. Not in disgrace. He stepped down to focus on personal matters. That phrase has become a kind of corporate obituary. Claire took over as interim chair. The articles framed it as continuity. Those of us who knew the internal dynamics recognized it for what it was. Containment. She wasn't leading. She was holding the center while the edges frayed. The trust restructuring followed shortly after. I found out because Michael forwarded me the filing. They had reversed the amendment. Not fully. Not cleanly, but enough to satisfy the review. My name was reinstated as a beneficiary, non-controlling, discretionary. It was meant to be an olive branch. I didn't respond. I didn't contest it. I didn't celebrate. It wasn't victory. It was correction. And correction, once delayed long enough, never feels generous. The real consequence came on December 19th, 4 days before Christmas. Northline's primary insurer declined renewal, not a cancellation, a non-renewal. The letter cited elevated governance risk and inconsistent compliance oversight. That kind of decision ripples outward. Other insurers followed. Premiums spiked. Coverage narrowed. Projects slowed. Contracts were quietly not renewed. Clients don't like uncertainty. They don't like families fighting behind closed doors. They don't like discovering that the calm, capable presence they trusted was never officially in charge. My phone rang that evening. It was my aunt, my father's sister. The one who never took sides openly, but always knew exactly where power sat. "They're blaming you," she said without preamble. "I assumed they would," I replied. "They say you abandoned them," she continued. "That you could have helped smooth this over." I smiled faintly. "By lying?" She paused. "They say you're punishing them." "No," I said. "I stopped protecting them. There's a difference. They're scared," she added. "I know," I said. "They should be." That night, I wrapped gifts for people who had shown up for me without obligation. Friends, colleagues, chosen family. I wrote simple cards. "Thank you for your time. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for not asking me to be smaller." On Christmas morning, I woke up late. Snow had fallen overnight. Quiet and even. My phone was silent. No missed calls. No guilt-laced messages. No emergencies I was expected to absorb. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching neighbors shovel driveways together, laughing, sharing thermoses. Ordinary. Peaceful. And then, unexpectedly, my phone buzzed. A news alert. Local court schedules hearing on Northline Trust dispute. I read the article slowly. A minority beneficiary had filed a petition challenging the trust's management and alleging breach of fiduciary duty. It wasn't me. It was a cousin, someone who had seen the cracks and decided to step into them. I felt nothing but a distant professional curiosity. Systems correct themselves, eventually. Sometimes they use the person who walked away. Sometimes they use someone still inside. Either way, the outcome is the same. I spent the rest of the day cooking, listening to music, and answering messages from people who asked nothing from me except my company. That evening, as the sun set early and the room filled with warm yellow light, I thought about the word revenge. People expect it to be loud. They expect confrontation, punishment, humiliation. But real revenge, the kind that lasts, is quieter. It's refusing to be available for exploitation. It's letting people experience the full weight of their decisions without cushioning the fall. I hadn't taken anything from them. I had simply taken myself back. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was. The ending didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a morning after a long storm, when the air is clean and unfamiliar, and you realize the noise you'd grown used to is gone. I didn't attend the court hearing. I didn't read the filings beyond the summary Michael sent me, not because I was afraid of what I'd find, but because it no longer concerned me. Whatever happened next would unfold without my name attached to it, without my fingerprints quietly smoothing rough edges in the background. That was the point. I spent that morning walking through a small park near my apartment. The trees were bare, their branches sharp against the winter sky. A woman jogged past me with a dog on a red leash. A man sat on a bench, feeding birds from his gloved palm. Ordinary scenes, unremarkable. And yet for years, I'd missed them, because my attention had always been elsewhere. On anticipation, on containment, on making sure nothing broke. I sat on a bench and thought about how easily responsibility becomes inheritance in a family like mine. Not the legal kind, the invisible kind. You're good at this, they say. You handle things well. You're the reliable one. And slowly, without asking, they hand you the weight. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinners where I'd smoothed conversations, the Christmas mornings where I'd adjusted seating, timing, moods, the birthdays where I'd been present but never celebrated. I thought about how love had been offered as proximity to power, not care, and how often I'd accepted it because I didn't know another version. Michael called later that afternoon. "The hearing's been continued," he said. No surprise. "No," I replied. "Though likely settle," he continued. Quietly. "Of course," I said. There was a pause. "You did well," he added. "By leaving?" I asked. "By choosing yourself, without trying to punish anyone else," he said. "That's harder than it looks." After we hung up, I realized something else had shifted. I no longer felt the need to be understood by them. That urge to explain, to clarify, to make sure your absence isn't misinterpreted, had vanished. People committed to misunderstanding you will do so regardless of evidence. And people who truly want to know will ask before they assume. Neither group required my participation anymore. A week later, the trust matter settled out of court. I learned about it through a bland legal notice sent automatically to named beneficiaries. No apology, no admission, no reconciliation. Just paperwork. I read it once, filed it away, and went back to my day. Work was good. Not dramatic, not glamorous. Good in the way that stability feels when it's chosen rather than imposed. I worked with organizations that respected boundaries because they were built into contracts. I was paid for my expertise, not for my emotional endurance. No one called me after hours unless it was agreed upon. No one expected me to absorb chaos as proof of loyalty. No one confused access with entitlement. And because of that, I was better at what I did. Clearer, sharper, present. One evening, months later, I received a message from a woman I didn't know. She said she'd read about Northline, that she'd worked in a family business for decades, that she'd been excluded from a will after her mother remarried. She asked one question. "How did you walk away without burning everything down?" I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I didn't walk away to punish them," I typed. "I walked away because staying was costing me my dignity." "Once you choose yourself, the fire goes out on its own," she wrote back. "Thank you. I needed to hear that. So did I. Once. That night, I stood in my kitchen, rinsing dishes, listening to the low hum of the city outside my window. My life wasn't perfect. It wasn't cinematic, but it was mine. No one was waiting for me to fix anything. No one was using my silence as consent. No one was confusing my competence with obligation. I thought about the words revenge, betrayal, inheritance. How often they're framed as endings. But in my life, they'd been beginnings. Betrayal taught me where the boundary was. Inheritance taught me what I was never owed. Revenge taught me that the most powerful payback is removal. If you're listening to this and you're in that quiet place right before a decision where nothing has exploded yet, but everything feels wrong, I want you to know something. You don't need permission to leave. You don't need to prove harm to justify distance. You don't need to stay just because you always have. Love that requires self-erasure isn't love. Family that only works when you're silent isn't family. And control dressed up as concern is still control. I didn't win by taking anything from them. I won by choosing not to carry what was never mine. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment, share your thoughts. And if you want to hear more stories like this about boundaries, karma, and the quiet power of choosing yourself, please like, subscribe, and stay with me. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. They end with clarity. And sometimes, that's the best ending of all.